Like many of you guys, I was a budget Yu-Gi-Oh player for a very long time, and there's nothing wrong with that. I had a lot of fun when I was a budget player. I got to play a lot of weird tech choices. However, in the last 2 years, I have had more of an income to spend on Yu-Gi-Oh, so I've really tried to buy many of the expensive cards of the format, especially when they're 3 of secret rares in whatever deck that I was playing at the time. And in today's video, I want to go through the 5 most expensive Yu-Gi-Oh playsets that I've ever bought. All of these came from the last 2 years pretty much, and I want to talk about how much value I actually got out of those cards. We're going to talk about how much I spent on them, which is about, in all these cases, retail of the time when they came out. And then I want to talk about if I actually thought, in hindsight, if they were worth buying. Now, I do want to say you don't have to buy the best cards or the most expensive cards to actually have fun in Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually, in several cases, some of the funnest tournaments that I played in were ones where I didn't have a lot of money, because you do play some pretty wild cards when you're trying to come up with things to replace the expensive cards with. However, if you do have the disposable income and you do go to a lot of tournaments, you really should invest in some of the expensive cards, at least the ones that you think you can actually get your money's worth out of, which is what we're going to talk about in today's video. So without further ado, let's jump right in. While there was a debate about how good Pot of Desires was when it was first leaked, pretty much the second it came out as a secret rare, all of the competitive players knew it was going to be a staple 3 of. So I bought 3 copies of it at about $200 for the entire playset, which at the time actually was slightly lower than retail. They were selling for about $240 for the playset, and man, I played Pot of Desires in tons of strategies. Eventually, it did actually get reprinted in the Megatins, but that's a year later. And I think that one thing that people forget, and this is going to be kind of the same for all these cards, but people forget about that even though Pot of Desires got reprinted in 1 year, and that doesn't sound like that long of time for people that bought it for the $200 price tag, even though that happened, a year is a lot of tournaments. I probably went to 10 to 15 tournaments, like bigger events, not even counting locals, using Pot of Desires in my deck, and honestly, there was no better time to play Pot of Desires than before Ash Blossom came out. Man, like if you think nowadays Pot of Desires is good, which most people have sort of accepted that it's a really good draw spell, back in the day when it first came out and it was really expensive, there was basically no counter to the card, which was awesome. You never had to activate Desires, pay the cost, and then ask your opponent, do you have an Ash Blossom? You could just activate it and you always drew 2 cards. It was ridiculous. In general, I think Pot of Desires was one of the best expensive purchases, simply because unlike some of these cards on these lists, it's a card that was good in pretty much every single format since it's been released, and also it's been good in pretty much every single deck in the entire game, from rogue strategies that I play a lot to casual strategies that I've profiled on the channel. Pot of Desires is one of the cards that I got the most mileage out of, especially considering how expensive it was. I would say, looking back, now that I still have my original playset of the Secret Rare First Edition, I definitely am happy with the fact that I bought it the first week that it came out. Half a year after I bought Pot of Desires, I decided to play True Draco Dinosaurs, and to play that deck, I needed to purchase Dragonic Diagrams. Now, this time I actually did have to pay $240 for the playset. It might have been like a little bit less than that, but pretty much at the end of the day, after all the taxes and fees were accounted for, it was around $240. And out of all the purchases on this list, I think that this was probably my worst one. I did get some mileage out of the Dragonic Diagram. I did play Dinosaurs for a while, but I didn't go to a single YCS or regional qualifier with True Draco Dinosaurs. I only went to locals and the WCQ, and if you've been following me for a while, you know that I never really do well at the WCQ. Most people don't. It's the hardest tournament of the entire year. It's also the biggest tournament of the entire year, so that meant that I pretty much spent that money in Dragonic Diagrams only to go like X3 drop at the WCQ, which really wasn't worth it. If I went to a regional qualifier, if I went to a YCS, maybe I would have been able to get that value out of those cards, and I'm not going to say I didn't enjoy playing Dinosaurs. They were really fun when Dragonic Diagram was at 3 and they still had Lithosagam, but the deck wasn't the best deck, and I probably should have just invested that money into Zodiac, Barrage, and cards like that instead of buying the Diagrams. Even though Diagram is a really good card, I ended up just not using it that much, and that was kind of my fault. I bought it near the end of the season, which is kind of a bad time to buy cards. If you're wondering, the best times to buy cards are like as soon as the new season starts. So for us, it would be starting up in August here, at the end of August, when the new regional waves start happening and stuff like that. That's the best time to invest in cards. But near the end of the season, like the last set of the year, definitely don't invest in those cards unless you absolutely need them. And in the case of Diagram, I ended up actually selling them pretty soon after the WCQ, which is when they're a lot of people thought that they would get hit, but that was pretty much right after I sold them. A lot of the True Draco cards did end up getting hit. You had Ignis Ignis going to 1 and you had Dynamite going to 0, which kind of actually lowered the price of Dragonic Diagram. So I'm glad I sold them when I did, but I think even selling them, which I think I sold them for like $100 for the whole playset, so I took about a $140 loss, and I think that that was absolutely not worth it, especially when compared to the purchase that I made just a couple months earlier with Pot of Desires. Speaking of the WCQ that I played Dinosaur Yang Zings at, I bought Ash Blossoms at that event, and believe it or not, at the time, Ash Blossom was not hyped. Not a lot of people were playing it. It was only $40 retail, and I actually bought a playset at that price. I might have even paid more than retail. I think they might have been like $35 retail. So I paid $120 for a playset of Secret Rare First Edition Ash Blossoms. We now know that that was an insanely good purchase. The card skyrocketed to like $80 almost immediately after that, but more importantly, even when the card got reprinted a year later, both copies were still at like $50 to $55, which meant even with the reprint and even a year after I bought mine were still below retail. And I haven't checked right now, but I'm pretty sure that it might even still be better when I bought them than they are right now, even after what, like a whole year here and 2 WCQ seasons. The fact of the matter is that Ash Blossom really wasn't that good at that event. People ask me how Ash Blossom can get power crept, and it's really not a card that gets power crept so much as it is a card that isn't good in every single format, and it wasn't really good in that format, particularly because Zodiac Barrage was way too good against Ash Blossom. If you Ash Blossom with Zodiac Barrage, you're taking a straight -1, and then your opponent can just activate the barrage on their next turn. So for Ash Blossom to be bad, this is kind of like a side tangent, but for Ash Blossom to be bad, there just has to be a lot of cards that don't destroy themselves as costs and actually just sit on the board. Then cards like Ghost Ogre are a lot better. But yeah, Ash Blossom was insane value. It wasn't a card like Pot of Desires that I played in every single deck for a whole year. It's obviously been very popular the last couple months, but it was a card that I feel dollar value wise, I probably got the best bang for my buck, only because I accidentally bought it ahead of time when the card would actually skyrocket in price, and I still have kept my Secret Rare copies, and it'll probably get more reprints going into like the coming months here. I don't know if it'll be in the Megatins, it probably will, but even with the Megatin reprints, I think I've gotten more than my value out of those $40 Ash Blossoms. When I decided that I would play Altergeist, I had to pick up multiple copies of Infinite Impermanence, and I actually didn't buy the entire playset at once. I bought 2 copies for the VIP qualifier. I think I paid 80s on those, which was slightly above retail at the time, but actually after that weekend they did go up to about $85, $90, and then 2 weeks after that I bought 1 more copy for around $80. So that's quite a lot for a playset of a card that I now call like one of the worst cards in an Altergeist deck. It's still an extremely powerful card, and it is really good against the Goki strategy, but I don't think that I've gotten quite as much value out of this card, especially at the price that I bought them, compared to a lot of the other cards that I've talked about, especially Ash Blossom, especially Pot of Desires, cards that I was able to play in a ton of different decks, because those cards aren't really dependent on the format. I mean, Ash Blossom is, but there's always going to be searching going on, but with Pot of Desires, I could play that in any deck, in any format, and it was going to be good. But with Infinite Impermanence, it's a really good side deck card, and I'm glad that I have access to it, but I wouldn't call it the best card in my deck, and I wouldn't really say that it's even better than Ash Blossom, which is in the same deck for half the price. But Infinite Impermanence is a really good card, and it's especially good in Altergeist, but I would say if you're playing a deck that isn't Altergeist and you want to save a whole bunch of money, honestly, just play Effect Failure. In like 9 out of 10 cases, it's almost exactly the same thing. I think more so than any card on this list. I mean, Diagram isn't really generic card, so I don't really put it in this category, but if you're looking for any of the cards on this list to replace, definitely just don't play Infinite Impermanence and play Effect Failure. Even if you are playing Altergeist and you're on a budget, I would say that you're not going to notice a huge difference by not playing Infinite Impermanence. The last one that I want to talk about is Evenly Matched. Now you might be thinking, but Doug, Evenly Matched actually came out way before Infinite Impermanence, and you are correct. However, when Evenly Matched came out, I actually thought the card would get hit on the Forbidden and Limited list, so it wasn't until very, very recently at YCS New Jersey that I actually started playing a playset of the card, and I purchased them for way over retail. I think I had to buy them for like 75s, which is 50% more than they're actually worth, which was ridiculous, but it was the only vendor that actually sold them, so I had no choice, and it was Saturday morning, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. The fact of the matter is, I super overpaid for Evenly Matched, but more importantly, I was wrong about my analysis that Evenly Matched would get hit, and I should have bought them long time ago. And actually, I think if I would have bought Evenly Matches when they first came came out and played them at all the events that I played Frogs, I likely would have gotten my invite, because if you remember, the worst matchup for Frogs was True Dracos, and Evenly Matched was one of the best card, if not the best card, against that deck. And at the last regional qualifier that I played Frogs at, 2 of my 3 losses were to True Dracos, so I'm almost positive that if I would have picked up those Evenly Matches when they first came out, which by the way, they were still at that $70 price tag, so I ended up paying the same price 6 months down the line. If I would have bought them, I likely would have gotten my invite, and this is probably the one that I regret the most not purchasing immediately. It's also the only one on this list that I didn't purchase right away, so I guess that isn't really a fair comparison. But yeah, definitely looking back on it, I wish I would have bought Evenly Matched way sooner. If you watched a lot of deck profiles, people mention that Evenly Matched actually isn't that good against the metagame. It's currently pretty good, but for a long time it wasn't. It wasn't really good against Spirals, wasn't really good against Pendulum Editions, all those types of strategies. But in all those deck profiles, people mention, oh, but this auto wins the True Draco matchup, which it definitely does. And that was something that I didn't really value enough, but looking back on it, yeah, I probably should have actually taken that into consideration, especially because I was playing a deck that lost to True Dracos way too hard. So with cards like Evenly Matched, if your deck is one where Evenly Matched or any similar card that comes out in the future is really good against, maybe consider investing in at least 1 or 2 copies of the card, even if you can't afford the 3 copies, because it'll help your worst matchup. Anyway though, that is going to wrap up this video. Let me know what you guys spent money on that you maybe regret, or what you spent money on and you don't regret and you thought you got a lot of value out of. I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts on this situation. I will see you guys later though. Thank you so much for watching. Bye. While I was editing this, I realized I forgot to say one last thing, so if anyone's still watching, let me just leave you with this final message. Basically, what I wanted to say was that in all the cases of these expensive cards, and pretty much any expensive card in Yu-Gi-Oh, outside of if they're just like collector's items, they're always expensive for a reason. Pretty much every card on this list is irreplaceable with any other card in the game, and that matters when we're looking at price. The reason these cards are so much more expensive than other cards that do similar things is that whatever the one extra thing that these cards do that the other cards don't, whatever that is actually makes a huge difference if you're trying to step up your tournament game. So while I do support budget players and playing whatever cards you like playing, in all the cases of expensive cards, especially new secret rares, even if they're hyped a little bit, in all of them they're going to be better than everything else out there, and that is definitely worth thinking about when you're trying to decide if you want to invest in them. Anyway, with that message, I'll leave you guys, so thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.